The next step on our configuration is to complete the continuous delivery on our Azure Kubernetes service. So the goal is that when we publish new changes into our applications, they are gonna go to the continuous integration pipeline, and if the test passes and it creates the Docker image into the Azure Container Registry, then the continuous delivery pipeline will take that image and it is gonna publish that into our Azure Kubernetes service. So for that, first step, we need to go to Azure and create a cluster Kubernetes. We select the resource group that we will be choosing. We're gonna choose the basic for test dev environment. We're gonna choose a name. The region is, we don't need availability zones. We're gonna choose the free tier, as we're just gonna be using this for testing. We're gonna use the latest version, and we're gonna just leave this as it is. The other configuration that we're gonna use, we're gonna use the basic. For our testing purposes, CPUs, so this is the cost per month, and as we are just gonna be just testing a little bit, let's choose this one that has 16 gigabytes of storage, and let's select this one. Let's just keep as it is and not count range. Let's just keep it to 1. For the next configuration, we'll just keep this as it is. For accessing, we leave it as it is also. We don't need any of this. The load balancer standard, it's okay. Review and create. We check that everything matches what we need, and we just create the application, the service. This is gonna take a little bit, and while this is being deployed, there are some configurations that we need to do. The second part is that we need a file. That is a YAML file that is going to say to Kubernetes what to do, how to deploy the applications, and what services that we need inside Kubernetes. For that, we can go here into the Kubernetes documentation and check all the parts that that the file has to include. I already have some information here that I posted a while ago. Which explains a little bit what Kubernetes is, and there was some issues with the images. So let's go to as I was saying, I have some information about what Kubernetes is, what a node is, how inside a node we can have uh, multiple services, and inside a node we can have a pod. A pod is a unit where we can have our different Docker images running, but usually you will just have just one image per pod. And I have some instruction here about the configuration file, how it is structured. We have different types of files, and in each file we can define what kind it is. We have different type of services we're gonna be using also. The one that we're gonna be using, the load balancer, which expose a port to our application to be accessible from outside the cluster of Kubernetes. This is how we create a deployment application to run our Docker containers, and the service that exposes that service into in this case, depending on the type, it is going to expose it inside the cluster Kubernetes or from outside. And this is how we attach uh, the service that we're going to be creating into the actual container. We are not going to be using persistent volumes, so we don't need this. Stateful set for stateful applications. This is another type. Instead of deployment, we have also stateful sets. This is when we're going to be deploying, for example, databases into the cluster, Kubernetes cluster, but we're not going to be using that because we're using our databases. When this Okay, let's go directly to the to our application. The first step, we need to define the YAML file. I'm gonna name it like this, and we're gonna just copy and paste this configuration file. And we're defining a deployment for our application. This has its own name and its own label. The label is like an identifier for this kind that is a deployment. Inside this deployment, we have some specifications, and for this specification, we're gonna be saying the state that we want for containers. The first one is the replicas, the number of pods that we want to be running. In this case, we're gonna be choosing 2. Then the matching labels. This is how we say that the pods or containers that are gonna be creating here are the type service history, and this belongs to this deployment file. Is a way to identify the containers, because once we create a container, each container is gonna have a unique name, and in order to be able to identify them, we just match or assign a name, and this is how we are using them. And for that, we need to use the matching labels. The template for this specific deployment, we're gonna be first assigning a label for each container, and as I said, with this, each container is gonna have this label, service history, and as I said before, this matching label will know that the container having this label belongs to this deployment, and this is how it is gonna know how many replicas we have running. Now it will know based on the name of the on the label that if for some reason one container crashes, it will know how to identify that there's one missing, and it will try to run it again to have the 2 replicas that we are defining here. Inside the template also has some specifications, its own spec, and for this one we are defining the containers. It has a name and it has an image name. The image is where this application is being stored. So for that, we need to go I got complete. Nice. To Azure registry. We go to repos. Well, first we need the IP. We copy this name and we replace the name of the registry, and the name of the application that we deployed. Each time we deploy a new application, the version changes, and to be able to change this version automatically, we need to do it when doing the deployment, and for that we're gonna just change this value when we are gonna be configuring the deployment for this in the continuous delivery. And for that, this is how we're gonna identify that everything inside these characters are gonna be replaced. Then we have the container port, where this application is gonna be running inside the container. We need to set up some environment variables. We're gonna say that this is for production, and we need to also pass the config app external to be ordered application to connect to the app config and get all the configurations to have access to the databases and I mean stream configurations and everything that we configure in the app config. So for that, we also need to go to the app config, access key, copy the connection string, and finally for the deployment we have these image pool secrets. This secret is gonna be used to connect to the um, to the Azure registry and say, hey, this is my secret, and I'm allowed to pull the image and run it into cluster Kubernetes. Finally, as I said before, we need to define a service to expose the service, to expose the actual node into the web and be able to access the container application. And we're gonna select the type load balancer, and we're gonna expose the port 80, and finally we're gonna match the target port that is gonna be the same as the container port. So we're gonna access from outside the port 80, and this is gonna redirect to the target port to connect to the container. And this is how it is gonna work. Once I finish this, let me just I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna replicate everything into my other microservices. So I did it for the history, account, we replace just the container registry URL and the app name, which is account. Save this. Now we go to the other application. We do the same. Security. And transactions. And we also change the endpoint from the config app. This was supposed to be replaced. Finally, the transaction. We can also be using config maps. That is another Kubernetes server. Okay, Kubernetes map. Another object for Kubernetes. So they can configure the environment variables, and we don't need to be defining everything in each one of these. But to keep things simple and not configure another object, we're just gonna save this inside the same file. But once we have our YAML file configured in our application, the next step is that in our continuous integration, we need to be able to access this file. And for that, we need to copy. Let me explain that by going to the config, into the continuous integration deployment, continuous integration, the pipelines. So let's take an example here. We need to edit the pipeline. When the artifact is published, it is published as a zip file. And this zip file, we don't have access to inside the zip file, we don't have access to the files. So what we need to do is that when publish the artifact, we also publish the zip file and we publish the YAML file that we just created. And for that, we need to add a new task that is called copy file. I'm gonna put it here. What is the source file? Well, first, this is the source file. We're gonna copy the YAML file. All the YAML files. I'm gonna copy to this one. Sorry. We're selecting our folder, and inside this folder, everything or all files that ends like in .yaml are gonna be copied into the target folder, and this is the folder where everything is being copied, and this is everything that we need to do for this out. So we save this and copy YAML file. And we need to do the same thing for all our pipelines. We choose a folder, we copy everything, open the YAML file, into the target folder, and we save this. New one, copy files, we add it, put it here, select our folder, all the YAML files, into the target folder, let's do this, go to the last one, select our folder again, and save it. Okay, now the next step is to configure the Azure Pipeline Continuous Delivery to deploy this application into the Azure Kubernetes. So for that, let's go to releases. In this one, we're gonna configure the release for the application into Kubernetes. We create an empty job, continuous delivery for history app. Let's go to the agent job, and we are gonna add a new task.